Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
And very good evening to you and welcome to Newsline Zoom. This evening our guest is the retired former Senior Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Dr. W.A. Wijewardena. Very good evening to you, Dr. Wijewardena, and thank you for joining me on Newsline Zoom.
Good evening to you also, Farah.
Thank you. Now then, Dr. Wijewardena, Sri Lanka's president says he has no forward plan. So, in the context of what we are going through now, who should make the plan, Dr. Wijewardena? Is it us who should make the plan? Is it the people who should make the plan? Or is it the president and his merry men and women?
Well, when President Ranil Wickremesinghe assumed the premiership in May this year, he made the very bold announcement to the nation that he is going to introduce the necessary reforms in the Sri Lanka's economy, and he will make a turnaround of the bankrupt economy and make it again working and also make it again prosperous. In fact, when he became the president, he addressed the nation as well as parliament, and he said that year 2048, when Sri Lanka would celebrate its centenary anniversary of independence from the British, his goal is to make Sri Lanka a rich country. So what it actually means is that the government led by President Ranil Wickremesinghe will have to prepare the necessary plans for the country to reach that particular goal. If he says that he doesn't have a plan right now, and if he expects the private sector to come up with their own economic reform program, it will not work, because what is necessary for Sri Lanka is like South Korea in 1960s, where President Park actually led it as a personal initiative to develop that particular country, which was just in abject poverty at that time. And within a matter of, say, one generation, he was able to make that country a rich country. So without the support from the government, without the initiative that comes from the government, because all the necessary laws and the reform programs will have to be introduced by the government of Sri Lanka, not by the private sector. And the private sector is simply a passive worker in this instance, because when it comes to the reform program. And therefore, I don't think that it is perfectly correct for him to say so right now.
Well, I'm sure it could send the wrong signals, and it's the wrong kind of optics. It's almost like he did a Gerald Ratner, and we probably might remember what Mr. Ratner did to his company. But let me ask this question. I've probably asked you this several times over the previous few months, but is Sri Lanka suffering a dollar crisis?
Well, of course, we are in the middle of a very deep dollar crisis, because right now, if you look at the foreign reserves on a gross basis as announced by the central bank, is about, say, 1.8 billion US dollars, out of which you have to take out the 1.5 billion US dollars, which we have got from China as a swap facility. And the usable foreign exchange balances available to Central Bank of Sri Lanka is nearly zero. But the biggest worry that we should have is not this zero gross foreign reserves. The Central Bank of Sri Lanka is indebted to the rest of the world to the extent of some 6 billion US dollars, making Sri Lanka's net position in foreign exchange holdings a negative position of 4.5 billion US dollars. So what we have to now do is, if we want to fill up the foreign exchange resource of the country, the first of all, what we have to do is we'll have to convert this negative position. It's very huge amounts, 4.5 billion US dollars, which we actually started from May last year. and continue to, grow month after month. So we'll have to first fill that particular hole before we want to fill the foreign exchange reserves to the country. So we are still in a very deep foreign exchange crisis, number one, and also we are moving towards a greater crisis in the future, number two.
We have no money for medicines. We have no money for the full requirement of fuel, and so we have fuel rationing. We have apparently no money for coal. We have no money for fertilizer, and the president says we need to up our game in terms of exports, and we look at tea and so on. Perhaps the tea export in numbers, in dollars, is up, but we have several other factors. We have increased freight costs, for example. I'd like to know, what is it in pure kilogram terms? Has our production actually increased? And I wouldn't be surprised if it hasn't increased, because we don't have enough of the right fertilizer. So in this context, Dr. Wijewardena, what is the matter that you're speaking of that is going to get even worse?
Well, of course, the tea production in 2022 is down by about 30% in volume terms, and we have not been able to increase the earnings from tea also in US dollar terms, but it has gone up in rupee terms because rupee has depreciated from 200 rupees per US dollar to 371 rupees per US dollar right now. So the tea industry is in a big problem today. Not only tea industry, and all other exports are simply, we are getting about, say, $1 billion US dollar export earnings per month, which will come to about $12 billion US dollars per annum. And still, even with the fuel rationing and also curtailment of imports, we have not been able to generate a surplus in the trade account on an annual basis. It is in the presently, it has been estimated that the deficit in the trade account in 2022 would be around $3 billion US dollars. And this will be continued to next year also. Right now, we don't have queues for fuel, medicine, and so forth due to two reasons. Reason number one is that some of the loans which had been previously granted by World Bank and ADB had been repurposed on the request of the government of Sri Lanka by the two institutions and made available for the importation of these essential items. Second one is there is this Indian credit line under which Sri Lanka has been able to get fuel, medicine, and various other essential imports from India under the Indian credit line. And both these facilities available to Sri Lanka is going to be exhausted by the beginning of next year. So once they're exhausted, since we don't have any foreign exchange available with us, our situation will become worse in 2023. In fact, many had expected this year 2023 would be a year of recovery. But I see that the recovery will have to be deferred for 2 more years till about, say, 2025. And we will not be able to make a recovery from the current bankruptcy level to the prosperity level by year 2023, as expected.
So, Dr. Wijewardena, right now we are not servicing any of our foreign loans. We are not. We don't have enough money to buy all the things I mentioned, like coal and fuel. There's rationing there, fertilizer. The shortages continue. So how do we pay our foreign loans? How do we begin to do something about it?
Well, we have already suspended the repayment of commercial loans and the loans that we had got from the individual countries, which we call the bilateral loans. We have already suspended, but what we meant by suspension is that we have added the principal amount due as well as the interest that we have to pay to the principal amount, so that the loan portfolio is growing month after month. In addition to that, whatever the loans that we had got from multilateral sources, that means World Bank, ADB, IMF and all the multilateral institutions, we are servicing them. And we have to service them because what has been suspended is out of the loans of the government of Sri Lanka, only the loans relating to the commercial borrowings plus the bilateral borrowings, which the Ministry of Finance has now estimated to be around 33 billion US dollars. And but the total loan obligations of Sri Lanka is about 80 billion US dollars. 80, because where we have the loans obtained by the private sector entities, loans obtained by the government corporations, state banks, private banks, and the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. When we add all these loans together, it will be about 80 billion. And now we are going to restructure only out of that 33 billion, which is only a very small segment. So what it means is that we are growing towards, the bankruptcy level month after month. So even if we have been able to restructure the commercial and the bilateral loans, it won't solve our problem because we don't have enough foreign exchange to service all these loans which Sri Lanka has obtained from foreign sources.
Is it normal, Dr. Wijewardene, for countries to have its foreign debt to be the equivalent of the full size of its economy, which is in Sri Lanka,
no.
80 billion?
In fact, that's a very, this is exactly why IMF had categorized Sri Lanka's foreign debt is unsustainable. Because if you have 100% of your debt obligations, both domestic and foreign, both equal to the size of the economy, which you call the GDP, what it means is that Sri Lanka doesn't have enough resources to develop itself, because we have to allocate a greater part of what we produce for the repayment of our debt. So which is again, which puts Sri Lanka in a very precarious situation. So it's not a good sign, and the very reason why Sri Lanka has been branded as a country with unsustainable foreign debt is mainly because of this reason. But of course, it has gone up to 137% of GDP, and to reduce this level, the most important requirement is for the government to cut down its borrowings from foreign sources as well as from the domestic sources. For that purpose, government has to cut down its total expenditure program, and simply by getting people to pay more taxes will not help Sri Lanka to come out of this problem.
On that note, let's go for a quick break and see what's ahead for this evening's headlines from the Newsfirst Primetime News team. We'll see you on the other side of the break, shall we?
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
25% for 2 months, 25.5% for 4 months. Valuable FD.
Electricity tariffs to be increased from January 2023. Prolonged power cuts will not occur. Legal action to be taken against false claims. Minister Kanchana and engineers trade unions at loggerheads. National Savings Bank hikes interest rates on loans. People with political connections have evaded paying back loans. A revelation from the Workers' Union of the Bank of Ceylon. Eric Solheim meets TNA. Discusses ethnic issues and foreign investment. 20,000 rupee allowance to be given to farmers to cultivate paddy in the Maha season.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
And welcome back to Newsline Zoom. Our guest this evening is the retired senior former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, none other than Dr. W.A. Wijewardene. Welcome again, Dr. Wijewardene. I know that Sri Lanka is in the throes of a huge crisis, and I thought I'd take your time, if you would indulge me, to read two messages, one from the hills in Kandy and one from presumably Colombo. It says here, my personal experience yesterday in Kandy. There were no medicines for my sister suffering from the deadly disease cancer. Just imagine the plight of the poor. We managed to buy it and administer the same. God bless Sri Lanka. The next one, it says here, Dr. Wijewardena, from what you said, it appears that the bank interest rates will not come down. Dr. Wijewardena, do you think that in this present ambience, the bank interest rates can come down, will come down, should come down?
Well, the answer to that question for us is that the inflation rate has now peaked in Sri Lanka at 70%. And we are expecting the inflation rate to come down to a single-digit level, that is less than 10% by year 2025. So till that time, the Central Bank of Sri Lanka will have to keep the interest rates high. There is another reason why Central Bank has to keep the interest rates high, is because of the necessity for avoiding the restructuring of the domestic debt of the government as well. The definition of the sustainability of domestic debt is that if the government is able to borrow from the market, whatever that matures, and also the pay interest on the same, if it is able to borrow from the market without resorting to printing money from the central bank. So what you mean by printing money is that the central bank buying the treasury bills and providing funds to the Ministry of Finance. So if it can continue to do that, then the domestic debt is sustainable, and the question of restructuring domestic debt or providing some haircut to the owners of the domestic debt could be avoided. Now, Central Bank of Sri Lanka is trying its best to avoid this. In the treasury bill auction that we had today, it was able to get 100% from the market at very high interest rates of 32% for the 3-month treasury bills and 29% for the 1-year treasury bills. So if the central bank wants to avoid the embarrassing situation of curtailing the restructuring domestic debt, it has to keep these interest rates high. And if it is to keep these interest rates high, means it cannot reduce the interest rates any further. That is why I said the solution comes from the government side, the Ministry of Finance. The government will have to cut down its total expenditure. Now, in the budget for 2023, the total expenditure on a gross basis had been estimated by the government at 7.9 trillion Sri Lanka rupees. But it was had been understatement of about 3.8 trillion, which the government has to issue for the repayment of the maturing treasury bills. So when we add that also, the total government expenditure during 2023 will be 11.7 trillion Sri Lanka rupees, which is a huge sum. And also it's about more than 30% of the estimated GDP of for 2023, which is around, say, 30 trillion Sri Lanka rupees. So what is necessary for the government to have this reduction in the interest rate is that the government will have to cut down its expenditure so that the necessity of borrowing money from the market by the government could be curtailed and reduced. Once it is reduced, there is always the interest rate structure will move down to a lower plateau, and as a result, we will have lower interest rate. So as long as the government is keeping to this high expenditure program, I don't see any prospect of the interest rates coming down in the near future.
And Dr. Wijewardena, where are these high expenditures being incurred?
Right now, for us, the most of this 11.7 trillion that I have indicated, the gross expenditure of the government, the majority is for the repayment of the loans, maturing loans of the domestic as well as the foreign ones. Second one is that the most of the expenditure had been incurred by the government, not on productive purposes, because there had been a heavy allocation for the defense sector of the country. And at the same time, the allocation for the healthcare and the education has not been increased. So when it comes to the total expenditure structure of the government, I don't think that the budget 2023 had even laid foundation for having a very what we normally mean as a productive budget of the government. So the expenditure has been spent not on any productive work, but on the normal maintenance of the government services, which has to be avoided at all costs. Now, at this present juncture, without getting the government to shrink itself from this high level to a low level gradually, I don't think there is any possibility for President Ranil Wickremesinghe to introduce any of these reforms that we expect him to do.
Dr. Vijayawardene, in your opinion, as a veteran central banker, what advice could you proffer this government, the President and his merry team? What advice could you give them?
Well, not only me, even the central bank throughout its existence had been advising the government to curtail its expenditure programs, number one. Number two, to direct the expenditure for productive purposes rather than spending on the consumption of the government. And third one is that the government should come up with a long-term development plan where we would be allocating resources for the purpose of sustaining a high economic growth continuously over the next 25-year period, so that we would be able to at least increase the position of Sri Lanka from the current lower middle income country to a high income by year 2050. And all these things will have to be done. At the same time, the private sector will have to be permitted to use its savings for investment purposes. And for that purposes, we cannot continue with the current import restriction program. We'll have to permit the private sector to import raw materials, machinery, and the capital equipment. All these things are necessary for Sri Lanka to have high economic growth. And it is through a high economic growth continuously that Sri Lanka would be able to come out of the present economic crisis.
How long do you estimate for Sri Lanka to come out of this crisis?
Well, if I actually expected President Ranil Wickremesinghe, when he assumed, the presidency in 2 months ago, to immediately introduce a long-term development program. So far, that has not been done. Even when he presented the budget for 2023 to Parliament, that was not done. Even today, it has not been done. So these are not the things that we can, postpone anymore. And a good example is, from President Park of South Korea, when he got the presidency in year 1961, he immediately introduced a 5-year development plan and continued with similar 5-year development plans subsequently also, allocated resources more for the productive purposes, reformed the government sector, reformed the education and upgraded the level of education and research and development facilities. And all these things will have to be done simultaneously. And if we are done simultaneously, we would be able to, gradually pick up and also come out of the problem. But right now, any delay in introducing this kind of reform program will actually postpone the final goal of economic recovery for Sri Lanka.
As a professional, retired now, but as a citizen of Sri Lanka, do you think that we, the people, have got a president, prime minister, cabinet, and all our legislators? Do you think that we, the people, have those people who are fit for purpose?
Well, of course, the general allegation against the present, the people who are in power today is that they are not competent. And therefore, there is a necessity for the nation to have a new set of administrators And that is a general feeling which everybody has. And I hope that this particular message is, read very seriously by President Ranil Wickremesinghe, and he will have a new team of people around him who would be able to take Sri Lanka forward.
Okay. 17 times, I think this is the 17th time that we are going to the IMF. Is that about right, Dr. Wijewardena?
16 times we have gone, the 17th time still we are negotiating.
Right. Okay. So 16 times we've been, we're negotiating the 17th. But as far as I can tell, there is no suggestion, encouragement, or hint even at anything to do with something resembling a political donations act. Why is that, do you think?
Well, of course, for any country to develop on a sustainable basis, there are basic requirements as far as the economics are concerned. One is that we must have a governance system under which the resources are allocated on the basis of the priorities decided by the top technical people in the government. And then there should be accountability. And if there are any, malpractices or irregularities, there should be a legal structure to take them to courts and punish them. Now, these are the things that had been done in Singapore as well as in South Korea throughout that period. And as a result, they were able to continue with the high economic growth. The most important factor that we have to keep in our mind today is that the confidence of the people will have to be built up. To build up the confidence, we must have that kind of system in place, the good governance system and also good accountability system, and also the rule of law and the general independence of judiciary and various maintenance of law and order. All these things will have to be there as a part of the economic plan that we are going to introduce. So
thank you very much, Dr. W.A. Wijewardena. We've actually run out of time. Thank you very much. And it's now time for the primetime news from the Newsfirst Primetime News team. Take care, and as always, God bless you all.